Hello, and welcome to this Magic the Gathering Liesa Shroud of Dusk Angel Commander deck profile video. That's a lot of words to describe that, but yes, over the course of this video I will go over all 100 cards of this commander deck and explain a bit of my reasoning behind including them, and then after I've been through the entire deck, I will go a bit deeper into how some of these cards might be used together. This is not a combo deck, don't worry, there are no combos to memorize, but there are some neat little synergies here and there, so we will, of course, need to talk about all that. And also, as a side note, it's kind of funny that this is the first Magic deck that I am profiling on this channel, given that Magic is the game that I play the most, and not Yu-Gi-Oh! As one might think. But yes, with all of that little intro out of the way, let's get right into this. So I've split this deck up into sort of logical units that go together, and the first unit is this unit of 1, the Commander, Liesa herself, the Shroud of Dusk, worth 5 mana, 5/5, white and black, so of course the entire deck is nothing but white and black cards. So she has flying and lifelink. Whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 2 life, which is an annoying ability, mostly for the opponents. You can probably work around it, but the really interesting thing about Liesa, and really the main reason why I decided to use her as the commander, is that rather than paying 2 for each previous time you've cast her from the command zone, as you normally would for any other commander, you pay 2 life that many times instead. So she will always be worth 5 mana, no matter how many times your opponents destroy her, but yeah, you do have to start paying life to cast her again and again, and well, maybe by the 3rd or 4th time that sort of starts adding up. But again, she is a 5/5. She has lifelink, so you can pretty easily get at least 5 of that life back really quick. Now let's talk about the angels. Well, this is an angel deck after all, so you would expect to see a good number of them, and yes, here they are. So starting off with the smallest one, we have Giada, the Font of Hope, which is a very strange, like, angel-centric mana dork almost, but I mean, flying Vigilance 2/2, she does make your other angels come into play with 1/1 counters for each other angel you already control, and yeah, she taps for white mana that you can only spend on an angel spell. So if you can get her into play early enough, you know, she does a lot of work. We also have the Righteous Valkyrie at 3 mana, and this card is loaded. Like, this is kind of busted, really. So whenever another angel or cleric enters, you gain life equal to its toughness, so already this is a big life gain engine in this deck, and if your life is 7 more than your starting life total, your creatures get +2/+2, so it also just buffs everything you've got in play, provided you have enough life. Again, for only 3 mana, it does a lot of work. Resplendent Angel is another 3 mana, at the beginning of each end step, not only yours, so keep that in mind. If you gain 5 or more life this turn, and the commander is a 5/5 with lifelink, you create a 4/4 white angel with flying and vigilance. So it builds you a board, pretty quickly actually, and for a whole heap of mana you can make Resplendent Angel get +2/+2 in lifelink, so if you have nothing else to do, I guess you can do that, but normally that second ability is not super relevant. It's the token-creating ability that is the main selling point. Now we also have the Angelic Field Marshal at 4 mana. This card is one I'm not totally sold on. It could probably go for something else, But for the time being, it's in here. As long as you control your commander, this card gets +2/+2, and all creatures you control have vigilance. So, you know, giving all of your angels vigilance is nice. I wish it gave everything +2/+2, but maybe for 4 mana, +2/+2 and vigilance for your entire board might be a bit much. It's not a bad card, but yeah, maybe someday I could definitely see myself replacing the Field Marshal with something else. Now, the Angel of Condemnation. This is... I like effects like this. It's kind of cool. So it has flying and vigilance. You can exile another target creature, return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step, so you can blink your own stuff, or maybe get rid of something troubling temporarily, or you can exert this card to exile another creature until Angel of Condemnation leaves the battlefield. So that gets rid of things in a bit more of a permanent manner, and both of those abilities cost 3 mana, but it's cool to have a creature that also gets rid of things of your opponents, and there's the flexibility of just blinking your own creatures as well. Sarah Paragon is a cool creature that lets you, like, it doesn't really bring things back, well it does, but it allows you to cast a permanent spell or play a land from your graveyard once per turn, and if you do, if that permanent would be put into a graveyard again, you exile it and gain 2 life. So it sort of brings your things back in a delicate way. You don't want them to die a second time, or else they're gone forever. But still, it's only 4 mana, which for an angel isn't too bad. Angels tend to be pretty big. So it's good. It hits the field fairly early, and I guess even just getting back some sort of fetch land or something might be worth your while. It also might just land ramp you that way. The Battle Angels of Tyr, though, they do a lot of stuff. Again, only 4 mana, it's a 4/4. Now this has Myriad, though, so it makes copies of itself for each opponent whenever it attacks. And when it does damage to a player, you draw a card if that player had more cards in hand than each other player, or you create a treasure if they controlled more lands, or you gain 3 life if that player had the most life. So you automatically get one of these attacking each player, so if you're behind, or if one other player is ridiculously ahead, you can get a lot of these effects and get a bunch of value off of it. It's a pretty solid creature. And the Archangel of Tithes, another 4 mana angel. This one is designed mostly to slow down your opponents, because as long as it is untapped, creatures can't attack you or a planeswalker you control unless the controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. And if Archangel of Tithes is attacking, then creatures can't block unless their controller pays 1 for each of those creatures. So it just makes your opponent have to pay to do whatever it is they might have wanted to do, and that really does throw off their game plan sometimes. Shattered Angel is a much more simple angel card, 5 mana, we're getting a bit bigger here, but whenever a land enters under an opponent's control, you may gain 3 life. So believe me, you can gain a lot of life off of this, especially in a multiplayer game. The Angel of Sanctions is, it's kind of similar to that Angel of Condemnation, actually. When it enters, you can exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls until Angel of Sanctions leaves the battlefield. But it also has Embalm, so it can bring itself back from the graveyard. It doesn't need any help in that regard. And then you get this enters the battlefield effect a second time. Note, though, that when it's embalmed, it becomes a token, and then it won't be coming back again, but still, it's nice to get a creature in play and get rid of something of the opponents at the same time. Archangel of Thune is very powerful in a life gain deck. It does have lifelink on its own, but whenever you gain life, you put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. That gets out of hand really fast. Especially if you've got some of the other cards in the deck that are gaining you life fairly regularly. So this is kind of a finisher, really. Lyra Dawnbringer, this is a, yeah, again, a lot of abilities, Flying First Strike, Lifelink, but it also gives all of your other angels +1/+1 and lifelink. So now, yeah, you've got a lot of lifelink going on. You are going to be gaining a lot of life. Valkyrie Harbinger here, this is, it's similar to that Resplendent Angel in that at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 4 or more life, you make another 4/4 Angel. So, also has a lifelink on its own and 4 power. Almost like that was all designed to go together. But yeah, you're making a lot of angels off of this one. Emeria Shepherd is a really cool recursion creature. The Landfall ability, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can return a non-land permanent from your graveyard to your hand. But if the land that entered is a plains, you can return that permanent to the battlefield instead. So, yeah, you're just getting stuff back real easily. Mind you, this card is worth 7 mana to play, so it's pretty big. But if you've got stuff in your graveyard, this makes it super easy to get things back and whatever, trigger certain abilities. And there are things that you can do with Landfall in this deck that you could even trigger this a couple times per turn. So yeah, it's very useful. Angel of the Ruins is another sort of removal angel. When it enters, you exile, not destroy, up to 2 target artifacts or enchantments. It also has Plains Cycling, so you can discard it to bring a Plains to your hand. 7 mana, you might not want this in your hand at the beginning of the game, so Plains Cycling kinda comes in handy. Chancellor of the Annex is another annoying card for your opponent to deal with, though. So it is worth a lot of mana again, but you can reveal it from your opening hand, and when you do, each opponent, their first spell of the game is countered unless they pay 1, so everything they do costs 1 more, once. So, a nice ability to have for free, just for having this in your opening hand, but also whenever, like if this is in play, whenever an opponent casts a spell, counter it unless that player pays 1. So, makes everything just a pain for your opponents to do if they want to actually play the game. And Angel of Despair is a classic commander card from a long time ago. Very expensive, but it's a 5/5, comes into play, destroy target permanent. Simple ability, but again, you're getting an angel, you're destroying something of theirs. It's, you know, it's a nice way to tip the scales. And the final angel in the deck is Avacyn, Angel of Hope, weighing in at 8 mana. It is an 8/8 with Flying Vigilance and Indestructible, and it makes other permanents you control indestructible as well. So if you don't want your things to be destroyed, then yeah, Avacyn is the angel to look toward. Having this card in play really does make things a little bit one-sided sometimes. And now that we've seen all of the angels, let's take a look at the non-angels and angel accessories. So, Speaker of the Heavens is a 1-drop human cleric. It taps to create a 4/4 angel token as long as your life is at least 7 more than your starting life total. So, it's actually a pretty easy way to start building a board, provided your life is high enough, and it's only 1 mana to play, so yeah, it really doesn't cost you much. Weathered Wayfarer is another staple of commander decks. 1 mana, you 1 mana tap, search your library for any land, put it into your hand, but you can only use this ability if an opponent controls more lands than you do. Well, this is a white deck, so land ramp isn't really its strong suit, but if you're against a green deck of any kind, they're probably going to have more land than you at any point in the game, so Weathered Wayfarer is normally pretty relevant, and there are some good lands that you want to search for with it. Suture Priest, whenever a creature enters under your control, you can gain a life. Whenever a creature enters under an opponent's control, they lose a life. So this is a cool way to benefit yourself and hinder your opponents at the same time. If they're playing a creature-heavy deck, this does add up pretty quickly. Stoneforge Mystic just comes into play and searches an equipment to your hand. There are some worthwhile equipment in this deck, so it's a good card to have at only 2 mana. And 2 mana tap, you can put an equipment from your hand onto the battlefield. Cool to be able to do that at instant speed, but unfortunately none of the equipment in this deck are that big that you're really gaining a huge amount of value out of this, but still, you never know. Remorseful Cleric is just graveyard hate. Sacrifice it to exile all cards from target player's graveyard. It's also a 2/1 with flying. That's not necessarily irrelevant, but yeah, exiling graveyards, it's handy to be able to do that sometimes. Trust me, you don't want the graveyard player to completely go out of control. And the Auriok Champion is another great way to gain a surprising amount of life surprisingly quickly. Protection from black and red is kind of cool, but whenever another creature comes into play, anywhere, you may gain a life. So yeah, if you can get Auriok Champion into play early, you're going to be gaining a lot of life. Bishop of Wings is another card that goes with angels. Whenever an angel enters, you gain 4 life, so yeah, gaining a lot of life here again. And whenever an angel you control dies, you make a spirit creature token with flying, 1/1. So 2 mana, again, it's not a big mana investment, just handy abilities to have, and you gain a lot of life, which is always good. Starnheim Aspirant here, 3 mana, but it makes your angel spells cost 2 less to cast, so all of those big angels suddenly become a lot easier to play. A simple ability, but I think it is worthwhile to have. Comball, the Consul of Allocation, has nothing to do with angels, but whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, they lose 2 life, you gain 2 life. So again, just like the, the Cleric earlier, this is just a great way for you to gain life while you're forcing your opponent to lose life for whatever it is they think they're doing. And Solemn Simulacrum is another just commander staple. Comes into play, search for a basic land, put it into play tapped, and when Solemn dies, you can draw a card. That's all it is. It's good to have. 4 mana is maybe getting up there, but this is also mono-white, so your resources for searching lands to the field are pretty limited. And Stoic Farmer is similar to Solemn, but not quite the same. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for basic plains, reveal it. If an opponent controls more land than you, put it into play tapped, otherwise put it into your hand. So there are other cards like this that search for a plains, but only if the opponent has more land than you. So at least this way, even if you have the most land, or everybody's tied for the same amount, you still get something to your hand. And it also has Foretell, so for a couple mana you can exile it and then play it from exile later for only 2 mana instead of 4. And here we have a couple miscellaneous angel accessories. We have Sarah the Benevolent, the Angel Planeswalker. Giving your creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. Well, it's not a particularly powerful ability, but it is cool that you can play her and immediately use the -3 to just make an angel creature token, so she protects herself with these tokens. And I mean, if you can actually get her to this -6 and you get the emblem with, if you control a creature, damage that would reduce your life to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead, that's a great ability to have on an emblem that your opponent can't really interact with. She's mostly just in the deck for, like, flavor reasons, but, you know, it's not bad. Making tokens is not the worst thing. And speaking of making tokens, we also have the Book of Exalted Deeds, another one of these cards that makes an angel token. Now this time only on your end step, if you've gained enough life, but you can also exile it and put an Enlightened counter on an angel, and then it gains You Can't Lose the Game and your opponents can't win the game, so it turns something into a Platinum Angel, which is an angel that I'm not actually using in this deck, But, you know, Book of Exalted Deeds kinda gets you there in an indirect way. Very white mana heavy though, so be aware of that. Now, let's take a look at my other artifacts, starting with some equipment. We have the Lightning Greaves here. Hang on, yeah, there we go, now it's in focus. We have the Lightning Greaves here. I mean, what would a commander deck be without Lightning Greaves? It's easy to play, gives something haste and shroud, and it's 0 to equip. So, yeah, if you have any kind of commander that wants to be protected and wants to attack or something, you probably want Lightning Greaves. And, well, if you've got the Greaves, you might as well have Swiftfoot Boots as well. This one actually costs a mana to equip, but it gives hexproof instead of shroud, so you can actually interact with your own creature that way at least. But yeah, still a very powerful card to have. Sword of the Animist. Now this is really an important equipment to get out if you possibly can. Gives the creature +1/+1, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is, whenever that creature attacks, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this allows you to turn any creature really into mana ramp for you, as long as it can attack. So you can build a lot of your basic lands anyway. You can get a lot of them into play through Sword of the Animist. And Sword of Hearth and Home, just like Sword of the Animist, actually, it's the same purpose, really. It's a bit bigger, but it does more things. +2/+2, protection from green and white, but whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to the player, so it has to actually connect, it can't just attack, but you exile up to one target creature you own, then search your library for a basic land card, and you put both of those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So again, it gets you a basic land card. That is the important thing. And then into the mana artifacts, we have Mana Crypt, which is a busted card. It's free to play, taps for 2 colorless mana, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you have to flip a coin, and if you lose the flip, it does 3 damage to you. Well, this is a life gain deck, so yeah, that 3 damage typically doesn't mean too much. Wayfarer's Bauble is just a colorless way to search your library for a basic land. Comes into play early, so yeah, it's good to use, especially if you get it early. Expedition Map is similar, except it brings any land from your deck to your hand, so not into play, which is unfortunate, but still, there are non-basic lands that you really want to be able to tutor for in this deck, and Expedition Map allows that to happen. And then there's Sol Ring. What would a commander deck be without Sol Ring? 1 to play, taps for 2. That's it. It nets you an extra mana right off the bat, and it's just a huge swing in your favor if you can keep it in play. Pearl Medallion. All of your white spells cost 1 less to play. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but pretty much every spell that we've gone over so far has been white. So, yeah, making them all 1 less to play, this can be a very, very powerful artifact to have. Again, especially if you can get it out there early, but at any point in the game, really, it's worthwhile having this. Oketra's Monument is similar to the Medallion. It makes your white creature spells 1 less to cast, so most of the creature, I think all of the creatures are at least partially white, so hey, this does work for pretty much everything. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you make a 1/1 white warrior creature token with Vigilance, so it kinda helps you build a board as well, although those warriors might not be doing a whole lot. And then we have the Archaeomancer's Map, which, yeah, again, very plains heavy, basic land. So, enters battlefield, search your library for up to 2 basic plains, put them into your hand, and whenever a land enters under an opponent's control, if they control more land than you, you can also play a land from your hand. So it's sort of playing catch-up again with whatever green player is just playing a whole bunch of lands uncontrollably. At least this way, you can maybe catch up with them a little bit. And it's nice that it brings 2 planes to your hand right off the bat. It does provide fuel for itself, too. And here we have the Enchantments. Yes, Authority of the Consuls, 1 mana, very cheap, makes all of your opponent's creatures enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever a creature enters under an opponent's control, you gain a life. So it's annoying for your opponents, and it gains you life. Yeah, you might be seeing a bit of a theme in that regard in this deck. Blind Obedience, very similar. It has Extort, so you can gain life off of it, and it makes your opponent's creatures and artifacts enter the battlefield tapped. So yeah, if they're using treasure tokens or something like that, it does slow them down considerably. Phyrexian Arena is another classic card. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card, lose a life. This deck doesn't draw cards particularly well, but it is kitted out, I think, to play for the long game. So if you can get this out and keep it in play, you are quite likely to draw a number of cards off of it. Same with Black Market Connections, which is pretty much just a better Phyrexian Arena, really, because at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, choose 1 or more. You either make a treasure token and lose a life, draw a card and lose 2, or make a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and lose 3 life. So you can just take 6 damage, or lose 6 life rather, and do all 3 of these and generate a huge amount of value for yourself. It is a very powerful enchantment. And then we have the Rampage of the Valkyries. 5 mana is a lot for an enchantment, but it does create a 4/4 angel right away. So you're practically playing a 4/4 with, Flying and Vigilance for 5, so you're practically making a Sarah angel here. But it also has the effect, whenever an angel you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Again, you're making life miserable for your opponents here. Which brings us to the instants and sorceries. So this is where you're going to be seeing a lot more of these black mana symbols, because it really makes up for a lot of the weaknesses that mono white tends to have. Like card draw, minions, murmurs for 4 mana, draw X cards, lose X life, where X is the number of creatures you control. So yeah, if you're building a lot of angel tokens, you can draw a ton of cards off of minions, murmurs. Moonlight Bargain is, yeah, this is a weird one. 5 mana instant, look at the top 5 cards of your library. For each one, you put it into your graveyard unless you pay 2 life, and you put the rest into your hand. So this could be a 5 mana, pay 10 life, draw 5 cards at instant speed, which, in a life gain deck, really isn't that bad. I mean, 5 cards is practically a whole new hand, so yeah, it's worth using. Stinging Study is a similar card. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the mana value of your commander. So this is a 5 mana, draw 5, lose 5. It's, you know, 5 mana for 5 cards, I'll take it, it's good. Just like Moonlight Bargain, except, yeah, you don't have the choice to lose less life, I guess. Grim Tutor, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, shuffle your library, you lose 3 life. Well, yeah, it's a worse Demonic Tutor. I know. But I am not using Demonic Tutor in my Angel deck, so yeah, I've got to settle with Grim Tutor, which is still pretty good. 3 mana for this effect is still very, very usable. And yeah, Haunting Voyage is... it's kind of the only recursion spell that I have in the deck. I have other recursion in other ways, but yeah, you choose a creature type, return up to 2 creatures from your graveyard to the battlefield of that type, but if it was foretold, you return all of the creatures of that type instead. So you can foretell it early and then play it later when you have a bunch of stuff in your graveyard. So it's not bad. It's really not bad. It's not stellar, but yeah, it's pretty good. And you know, you can generate a lot of board presence off of this if you use it after a Wrath or something like that. And speaking of Wraths or whatever, let's get into the removal, which is something Black-White is really good at. So here we have Path to Exile. 1 mana, exile target creature, its controller can search their library for a basic land, put it into play tapped. So, giving your opponent a basic land is not ideal, but 1 mana exile, you can't go wrong with that, you really can't. Similar with Swords to Plowshares, 1 mana exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power, which is probably even less relevant for them than getting that land, so Swords to Plowshares is arguably even better than Path to Exile. Fracture, 2 mana, destroy an artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker, so it's cheap to play, it gets rid of a lot of fairly relevant card types, not creatures unfortunately, but still, good to get rid of those annoying artifacts and enchantments. D-Spark, 2 mana, exile a permanent with mana value 4 or greater. Well, there's a lot of stuff in this game that is mana value 4 or greater, so being able to spend 2 mana to just wipe it off the board, it's good. It's a good card. Mortify, yeah, getting into 3 mana cards here. Destroy target creature or enchantment. So it is an instant, so it's similar to, like, Vindicate or something like that, but at instant speed. And yeah, creatures and enchantments, there's a lot of those that you want to get rid of, so it's maybe worse than a lot of the exile spells, but it's still not bad. Like, if Mortify is worse than something else, that really just speaks to how good that something else might be. Such as Anguished Unmaking, like, this is really, really something. 3 mana instant, exile a non-land permanent, you lose 3 life. Well, losing 3 life is not very relevant, but exiling a non-land permanent is extremely relevant. Yeah, you can get rid of pretty much anything with that. Withering Boon. Now this is the card that nobody ever expects to see. It's worded weirdly because it's an old card, but it's 2 mana, it also costs 3 life, but you counter target creature spell. Nobody expects the mono-black counter spells. Similarly, nobody expects the mono-white counter spells, like Lapse of Certainty. Yeah, we've got just a little bit of control spells in this deck. A counter target spell, and you put it into its owner's library, put it on top of its owner's library, rather, instead of into the graveyard. So it also kind of hoses their next card draw, which is, you know, sometimes you want cards to go to the graveyard, sometimes you don't, so 3 mana is a bit much for counter spells sometimes, but in mono white you kind of take what you get. Heliod's Intervention is a nifty modal card. You either destroy X artifacts or enchantments or gain twice X life. So great to have in a life gain deck. Kaya's Wrath is a 4 mana destroy all creatures, very good, and you gain life equal to the number of creatures you controlled that were destroyed this way. So you kind of get a little bit out of it as well, but the important thing is it is a cheap Wrath if you need it. And Austere Command is another modal spell. 6 mana is quite a bit, but you have a lot of choices here, right? You can destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, or destroy all small creatures or all big creatures. You choose 2. So you can probably craft together a Wrath out of this that leads you to, you know, it leaves you ahead of the opponents. And to sort of bridge the gap between spells and lands, we have the 2 mythic rare flip spell lands from Zendikar here. So, Agadeem's Awakening, you return from your graveyard to the battlefield any number of target creature cards that each have a different converted mana cost X or less. So you can put a lot of mana into this and get a whole bunch of stuff back. And Amiria's Call is very expensive at 7 mana, but you make 2 4/4 angels, and all of your non-angels gain indestructible. So, yeah, it's sometimes relevant. Getting the 4 angels is actually pretty good for 7 mana, but both of these cards also flip into a land that taps for black or for white, and for 3 life it flips into that land untapped instead of tapped. So these are practically basic lands if you really need them to be. So there's not a whole lot of reason to not use these cards. That's why I'm using them. And that brings me to the very end of the deck, this pile of lands. Yeah, so I'm going to go through these pretty quick because most of them aren't super exciting. There is Command Tower, you know, it taps for a mana, 1 mana of any color from your commander's color identity. I mean, it's Commander, right? You gotta have Command Tower. And then there's a whole heap of other lands that tap for black or for white. Shattered Sanctum, Temple of Silence, Scries when it comes into play, that's kind of cool. Orsov Basilica actually taps for both colors at once, but you have to return another land to your hand when it comes into play. Vault of Champions usually comes in untapped. Silent Clearing you can sacrifice to draw a card. Isolated Chapel, Fetid Heath is the filter land for these colors. You can turn one color into either or both other colors. Caves of Koilos there does damage when you tap it. Prismatic Vista, here we go. So, this one, you tap it, pay a life, sacrifice it, search for basic land, put it into play. Very good. Fabled Passage, same thing, except that basic land comes in tapped unless you control enough lands. But still, it's a good way to search for the basic land you need. Marsh Flats, you sacrifice it, search your library for a Plains or Swamp card. It doesn't have to be a basic Plains or Swamp. Put it onto the battlefield, untapped, shuffle your library. Then we have Scrubland, the classic dual land. It is a Plains Swamp, so it taps for white or for black. Same with Godless Shrine, except this one comes into play tapped unless you pay 2 life. So the thing that you do if you need the mana and you have one of those fetch lands, then you get the Scrubland first so that you don't have to pay life. If you don't need the mana right away, you can just get this and allow it to come in tapped, and then you don't need to worry about paying life for it. Mistvale Plains is it is a Plains. It comes into play tapped, but you can put a card from your graveyard on the bottom of your library. I don't know, maybe you want to do that. It's just a cool card. And then we have a whole bunch of Plains. Plains, I think I have about, well, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We have 9 Plains. There we go, basic Plains. And Emeria the Sky Ruin. This is why I have so many Plains in the deck. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 7 or more Plains, you can return a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, it's just another pretty easy way to just get stuff back, especially if you've been doing a lot of ramping with your Plains. And then we have a couple swamps. There's not a lot of black mana needed in this deck, and a lot of my lands tap for either color anyway, so I don't need a lot of swamps. I got 2. And an Urborg that turns everything into a swamp in addition to its other types. So as long as you have this, you never need to worry about black mana. Castle Lochthwain, it does tap for black mana, comes into play tapped unless you control a swamp, but you can also draw a card off of it and lose life, so in a pinch, it does allow you to draw extra cards. Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx on the other hand, this adds mana to your mana pool equal to your devotion to a certain color. So a lot of these angels are very color heavy, you might have noticed, so you can add a huge amount of mana with Nykthos. Ancient Tomb just taps for 2 colorless, and then does 2 damage to you. Not a big deal because you're gaining a lot of life, but this does help you to get ahead in mana production. Temple of the False God also taps for 2, except you can only use it if you have 5 or more lands in total. So at the beginning of the game, you don't really want to see Temple of the False God, but later on, it's a great land to have. Volrath Stronghold, I rarely use this ability, but, you know, in an emergency, it's nice to be there. Put a creature from your graveyard on top of your library, otherwise it just taps for colorless. And then the Seraph Sanctuary at the end. When it comes into play, you gain 1 life, and whenever an angel enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So just another cheap and easy way to gain a little bit of life, or maybe a lot if you get it out early enough. Are you still there? Yeah, 100 cards is a lot to go through at once. But at this point in the video, I would just like to sort of go over synergies within the deck. Yeah, it's not a combo deck. There's nothing that really needs to be memorized, but there's a lot of stuff that you can look out for, cards that go well together, or just little themes and things to look out for as you're playing. So, we start off with the commander, you know, Liesa. She is inherently a kind of a stacksy card. Now, I didn't build this deck to be a dedicated stacks deck. I didn't build it to completely stop the opponents from playing the game. But I did add a lot of effects similar to what Liesa does that makes your opponents pay life to cast spells. So there's a lot of like taxing effects, or effects that make you benefit whenever your opponents do stuff. So things like Archangel of Tithes that slow down your opponent from that prevent them from attacking you, rather. Or Auriok Champion that just gains you a bunch of life, just like Shattered Angel does as well. Chancellor of the Annex just counters stuff, again slowing down the opponents. Suture Priest makes them lose life when they play creatures. Comball makes them lose life whenever they play non-creatures. Blind Obedience, Authority of the Consuls make things come into play tapped. And Rampage of the Valkyries, making your opponents think twice before destroying your angels anyway. So just all this stuff, it all works together, especially if you have multiple pieces in play at once, to slow down whatever the opponent is doing, so that you have a bit more time to enact your own game plan. Because angels tend to be pretty big, and they tend to be pretty mana heavy, so if you can stop your opponents from playing a lot of stuff in their early game, then you are going to be a lot more better off later, and you can build toward something in the late game. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't been making particularly heavy use of artifact ramp in this deck, and that was done on purpose. Because sure, I could use all the signets and talismans or whatever, artifacts that tap for mana, but I wanted to challenge myself to instead rely on Plains Ramp so that I could make better use of Emeria the Sky Ruin. Yeah, this one land right here kind of shaped how I built a lot of the mana ramp in this deck. So we have stuff like Expedition Map or Weathered Wayfarer, which help us find Emeria in the first place, but then there's all this other stuff like Wayfarer's Bauble or Solemn or Stoic Farmer that just allows us to get all of these plains into play. And don't forget, Scrubland, Godless Shrine, and Mistvale Plains, these are all plains as well, so they count toward Emeria the Sky Ruin. But I think the biggest contributors to getting Emeria online would be the two swords here. These are very important to have, because as long as you have an angel or something that can attack relatively safely, you should be able to use these to just get an extra plains every turn. So they really add up pretty quickly, and yeah, sooner or later you are probably going to get Emeria to start going off and bringing pretty much whatever you want back from your graveyard, which will be a hassle for your opponent to deal with. And I guess this is kind of Plains Ramp adjacent, but we also have Emeria Shepherd, of course. And something kind of cool that you can do with Emeria Shepherd, actually, is Plains Cycle, this Angel of the Ruins, which will send Angel of the Ruins to the graveyard and add a Plains to your hand, and then if you play that Plains, you can bring Angel of the Ruins right back into play and exile some things with it. So that is a neat little interaction. But Emeria Shepherd, in general, is a card that you probably want in play, because you're going to be bringing back all sorts of stuff. It's also very much worth protecting if you happen to have Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots, because as long as this is in play, and as long as your opponent can't actually, destroy it easily, then anything that they do manage to destroy is going to be coming right back, which will be a consistent pain for them to have to deal with. Which finally leads me to my angel token producers, because they really are, in a lot of ways, the lifeblood of this deck. Because again, angels cost a lot of mana, so if you can play them for free, I mean, hey, you might as well, right? Speaker of the Heavens, Sarah the Benevolent, the Book of Exalted Deeds, Resplendent Angel, and Valkyrie Harbinger, they all go together really nicely, especially if you have a couple of these in play at once, to just flood your field with angel tokens. And a couple of these, if you're gaining life even on your opponent's turn, they will also be making angel tokens on your opponent's turn. It will quickly become overwhelming with all of these. I mean, they're only 4/4s, or I think this one makes 3/3s, so they're not massive, but it is a lot of flying creatures that will be difficult to deal with if the opponent's deck isn't designed specifically to deal with that volume of flying creatures. And there you go. That was my Liesa Shroud of Dusk Angel Commander deck. Now, I've actually been playing this deck quite a bit recently. It's one of my more recent decks that I've made, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. There's a lot of little themes in this deck, and it all goes together nicely, and, provided you aren't off to a terribly slow start, it does apply quite a bit of pressure fairly early on. A lot of these 4/4 flying angels, they do hit the field for only about 4 mana, so it is a threat that your opponents need to deal with if they can, because of course you have cards like Liesa that make them pay for everything that they want to do. So it is a neat little, I don't know if you'd call it an archetype, but it is a cool style of deck that I haven't really tried making up until this point, so I'm happy that this one, it turned out as well as it did. But that does bring me to the end of this deck profile, and I do hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, then please leave a like, a comment, subscribe, and I hope that you'll join me again next time for whatever deck I might be profiling next. Till then, ta-ta. There it is! There it is! Well, I asked for an Ancient Copper Dragon, didn't I? Oh, what? No! This is the card I was looking for! Oh, thank goodness! That is wild! That is absolutely wild! Predaplant, Therion Ball, backup team, oh, yes!